Breakdown in the doctors' talks, another strike next week and more could follow. Thousands of operations will be cancelled as all but emergency care is affected. There remain deep divisions between the two sides.
Also tonight, how did Cheryl die? A new inquest into the death of this army recruit 20 years ago.
Doing a deal on Europe, progress tonight on Cameron's EU reforms.
And a sadder world without Wogan. Still, the tributes come to the broadcaster who, for millions, was simply a friend.
If we all had 1% of what he had on the radio, we'd be 100% better.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mark Austin and Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. The alarming prospect of prolonged upheaval in NHS hospitals surfaced tonight after the doctors' talks broke down again. They've called another strike for next week on February the 10th. That will affect all but emergency cover. Thousands of operations and procedures will be cancelled.
Now, the government says if no agreement is reached, it might impose new contracts on the doctors, which could lead to further strikes. The British Medical Association warned this evening that ministers risk souring relations with a whole generation of doctors. Our health editor, Rachel Younger, has more.
Save our NHS, save our...
No doctor wants to be on a picket line instead of the wards. And after this walkout last month, it looked like once was enough. The second strike called off and negotiations back on until today, when they broke down dramatically.
Unfortunately, the government continues to be intransigent about what it wants to do. It continues to play politics with this scenario, and junior doctors are simply not going to do that.
It means consultants will once again have to step in to cover their colleagues.
Had a little bit of trouble in the leg in the night.
Although it won't be enough to protect patients entirely, last time over 3,500 had routine operations cancelled. The next strike on Wednesday the 10th of February was originally planned to last just 12 hours because for the first time it involved junior doctors working in emergency departments walking out. Now the strike will cover 24 hours because doctors have decided urgent care will be provided. But they won't budge on opposing plans to stop all their work on Saturday qualifying for overtime. Although the government has conceded that extra pay should kick in at 5 p.m. that day, rather than 7, as originally suggested. Now the Health Secretary's learnt that won't be enough, receiving a letter from his lead negotiator, who writes, if doctors won't be moved on overtime, I will have to conclude that there is no opportunity for a negotiated settlement. If the government is to deliver the 7-day NHS it claims will be safer for patients, that doesn't leave many alternatives. The letter a veiled threat to impose a contract doctors insist would be devastating.
If you want to see an exodus of doctors from the NHS who would like to have some semblance of a quality of life that they can spend with their family, their friends, and look after their own health, then by all means continue pushing this issue as they are at the moment.
It could be worse. A full walkout on the 10th may well have threatened patient safety. But right now, that's the slimmest of silver linings.
So it really doesn't look good, does it? Is this a complete impasse now?
It's very much how it looks, isn't it? So David Dalton, the lead negotiator, brought in by the government, chief executive of one of the leading hospitals in the country. He was the man the junior doctors believed knew about their reality, knew the demands that were being placed on them, and things did seem to be going well. But read that letter more closely he's written to Jeremy Hunt. He talks about how the contract has caused great uncertainty to the NHS. He says now effective implementation needs to happen, agreement by no later than mid-February. Well, if there's no negotiations and that implementation is going to happen by mid-February, that sounds very much to junior doctors as if it's going to be imposed. And you can only imagine, because we've heard the language, haven't we, from that junior doctor there, how that is going to go down. I think the NHS is in for a very difficult few months ahead.
And as we speak, a strike next week. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks.
A coroner has promised that a fresh inquest into the death of Private Cheryl James at Deepcut Barracks 20 years ago will be full, frank and fearless. But he said it won't look at whether or not there was a wider culture of sexual abuse at the army base in Surrey.
Private James was one of 4 young recruits who died at Deepcut in mysterious circumstances. Juliet Bremner reports from the hearing in Woking.
This was the end of a long, hard fight for Des James. He hopes he'll finally learn the truth about his daughter's death. inside the coroner's court where a new inquest is about to be heard. Cheryl James was 18 and had just finished her preliminary army training when she was found dead, a bullet wound to her head. It's more than 20 years since the body was discovered at Deepcut barracks in Surrey. A gun was by her side. The army said it was suicide. It's this assumption her father will not accept and has been struggling to get overturned.
There remains no evidence that the weapon that was found at the side of her was either the weapon that killed her, and certainly no evidence that even if it was, that she was the person who fired the weapon.
Between 1995 and 2002, a total of 4 young soldiers died at the Deepcut barracks. In 2004, calls for a public inquiry were rejected. A 2006 review was critical, but concluded the deaths were probably self-inflicted. Finally, in 2014, the High Court ordered today's fresh inquest. The family argued they should be allowed to present new evidence about allegations of sexual abuse at the barracks that may have contributed to Cheryl's state of mind.
I do honestly believe that a culture was created at Deepcut that allowed these people to exist and allowed them to intimidate children effectively in the way that they did. It was bullying at an extraordinary scale.
The judge promised this would be a full, frank and fearless inquiry into Cheryl's death. But he told Mr. James the wider culture at the base and allegations of sexual assaults before his daughter's death could not form any part of the inquest.
The hearing here at Woking should last about 7 weeks, and they're due to hear from more than 80 witnesses in person. Des James was himself supposed to kick it all off with his testimony this afternoon. Instead, we had legal arguments centring around those new allegations and how they might be dealt with. So everything has now been adjourned and everyone has been told to come back here on Thursday.
Julia Bremner in Woking, thank you.
Now, the explosive spread of the Zika virus is now a global emergency, the World Health Organization has just declared. The organization says a coordinated response is needed to tackle the infection, which has been linked to brain damage in thousands of babies in Brazil. The move should help get money to countries at risk and also help research the virus, which as yet has no cure.
Now, Britain is a big step closer to doing a deal over its demands for EU reforms. Proposals will be released tomorrow after good progress was made in talks between David Cameron and the European Council President Donald Tusk. Our political editor Robert Peston is at Westminster. Robert, put this in context. How important is it?
I think it's very important because it means that the most powerful bureaucrat in the European Union, that's Donald Tusk, President of the European Union's Council, thinks that a deal now can be done between David Cameron and other EU leaders on reforms that the British government wants that would then allow David Cameron to say to British voters, I want us to stay in the EU, and he would like the rest of us to vote his way. Now, to be absolutely clear about this, just because Donald Tusk thinks a deal is doable, it doesn't mean that we are guaranteed in a couple of weeks' time to get agreement from all those EU leaders, because they all have national interests and there are certain aspects of what David Cameron wants that makes them uncomfortable. But I would say there is now a better than evens chance that the referendum will be kicked off, that incredibly important campaign that will decide our future in Europe, in just a few weeks' time.
OK, Robert Peston, Westminster, thank you.
And on the other side of the migrant crisis are, of course, the refugees who continue to risk their lives making the deadly crossing into Europe. Since the beginning of this year, more than 52,000 migrants have arrived in the Greek islands. That's 35 times more than the same period last year. More than 250 people have died attempting the crossing this month. Our senior international correspondent John Irvine has been to the Greek island of Samos and followed the fate of 2 groups of refugees.
We are searching for those in peril on the Aegean Sea. And given the number of lives lost out here this winter, these Afghans are very fortunate we were able to find them. They've been adrift for 7 hours. Their outboard broke down halfway between Turkey and Greece. We are filming from a rescue ship operated by a charity called Migrant Offshore Aid Station. And night after night, they live up to their name. For people from a landlocked country who've never seen the sea before, this was all a traumatic experience. It was also, of course, a life-saving one. 38 souls were safe and sound. Stumbling around in the dark, these are Syrians, mostly women and children, who've just landed on a remote Greek outcrop. After a perilous crossing, just getting ashore was far from easy. The Turkish smuggler did them no favours. Between them, the 36 Syrians he'd packed onto his speedboat paid him a total of 54,000 euros. No wonder he gunned it back to Turkey to find more passengers. There's so much money involved for the smugglers, so much desperation among their human cargo, that even in the middle of winter, in the dead of night, they're daring to make this journey. It's little wonder the European Union has absolutely no idea how to stop this. Chilled to the bone, the Syrian refugees paused to get the blood flowing and to do a head count.
One by one.
When they set off again, they weren't sure where they were going, but then their journey is more about leaving than arriving. They have left a war zone. Nevertheless, as the leader of their little group explained, it was home and it hurt saying goodbye.
My mom, yeah, she's very old. When I leave, she cried. Okay. She told me, please don't go. Go for my children.
It was just after dawn when the Afghans found drifting at sea finally arrived in Europe, courtesy of their rescuers. Soon they were on their way, no doubt to face more insecurity and hardship as they look for a new home in a foreign land.
Thank you.
John Irvine, ITV News, in the Aegean Sea.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, the catalogue of failures behind the collapse of Kids Company.
Also, apprentice or boss, Trump's bid to draw first blood in the race for the White House.
And from school friend to broadcasting colleague, Henry Kelly's personal tribute to Sir Terry Wogan.
He was such a smashing fella, a lovely, lovely member of the human race.
Those stories and more right after the break.
Hello and welcome back. The race to be the next US president starts in earnest in just a few hours' time. Between now and July, every US state and overseas territory will hold votes called primaries or caucuses to decide who should be the Republican and Democrat candidates. First to choose is Iowa, which often sets the tone for the entire campaign. From there, our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports.
The establishment and the party elites are bracing for a shock tonight.
Thank you for being here. So this is it. It's crunch time, right?
Grappling with the idea that a TV reality star and outlandish tycoon can win the Iowa vote and become a true contender for the Republican nomination.
This is when we start. This is day one. We're going to take back our country from these incompetent politicians.
And the next president of the United States, Hillary Rodham Clinton.
For the Democrats, Hillary is battling for victory here, using every weapon at her disposal, not least her best two allies on the campaign trail, Chelsea and Bill.
Hello, Des Moines! Oh my gosh!
She is imploring her supporters to come out tonight.
I hope you will go. I hope you will stand up for me. I hope you will fight for me. And I promise you this, I will stand up and fight for you every single day of this campaign.
Hillary can survive a loss here in Iowa. She has the resources, the money, the infrastructure to go deep into the contest. But it would still be a considerable blow to her pride and to the sense of inevitability surrounding her candidacy.
Thank you, and God bless you.
Her problem is that she is seen as the ultimate insider during a campaign cycle when people are craving change. Every Iowan community tells a similar story. This is Winterset, the birthplace of the state's most famous son, John Wayne. And wherever you turn, Donald Trump's support is surprisingly broad.
I think we're looking for something to shake it up, and I think he maybe has done that.
So the so-called chaos candidate is actually quite attractive to you?
Yes.
The thing I like about Trump is that he's not in somebody else's pocket, like a lot of the politicians are.
This is a rural state often overlooked, except for its political significance once every 4 years. And tonight it seems likely it will send a warning shot to Washington, that the country is quietly seething. Robert Moore, ITV News, in Des Moines, Iowa.
An extraordinary catalogue of failures was behind the collapse of the charity Kids Company, MPs concluded today. They said the organisation had become too politicised and trustees were in thrall of its controversial founder, Camilla Batmangelish. And ITV News has obtained an internal report which had warned about the charity's problems 10 years ago. Our social affairs editor, Penny Marshall, reports.
She had friends in high places and all the right places. But the woman who could once do no wrong now finds herself lambasted for doing little right.
What is evident in this charity is a whole litany of risks were allowed to persist for a very long period. A very large personality who was allowed to dominate.
This parliamentary investigation had lasted months.
On what basis you've decided that this is a failing charity? Because if it's on the basis... No, hold on.
As well as criticising Batmangelish, the chair of the trustees and former BBC creative director Alan Yentov came under fire for failing to grasp the charity's financial difficulties. Kids Company collapsed last summer, leaving hundreds of the young people it had helped protesting at its closure. The government had given it $3 million just days before, and ministers too were criticised for their lack of scrutiny. But ITV News has learned that as early as 2006, Batmangelish was warned about all these potential problems by an independent report, which said many of the commendable aspects of Kids Company are attributable to Camilla. Many of the problems, though, are also attributable to her. And the report also warned of weak finances and a lack of planning.
Clearly, Kids Company didn't act upon that kind of advice, and we'd given it in 2006. Others gave it at other times. And it's a big shame, because if they put some of those things right, we'd still have a thriving charity doing great work today.
It feels like this whole sorry saga is now drawing to an end. Last week, a police investigation into allegations of sexual abuse at the charity was dropped. There's now one more inquiry to go from the Charity Commission. Kids Company has dismissed all the criticism as inaccurate, unbalanced and irresponsible, and maintains a malicious campaign has shut them down. Penny Marshall, ITV News.
A team of British researchers has been given permission for the first time to genetically modify human embryos. They're hoping to discover the causes of miscarriage and infertility. The embryos will be destroyed once tests are complete, but critics fear the pace of change is too fast and could one day lead to so-called designer babies.
Parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England are being hit by Storm Henry, the 8th major gale to hit this winter. The strong winds forced the closure of the Forth Road Bridge this afternoon.
And Manchester City have got their man. Bayern Munich's Pep Guardiola is to take over as manager at the end of the season. He replaces current boss Manuel Pellegrini. City are currently second in the Premier League.
And finally, more fond tributes have been paid today to the broadcasting legend Sir Terry Wogan, who died on Sunday. The DJ Chris Evans, who stepped into his shoes in the breakfast slot at Radio 2, described Sir Terry as a father figure.
Well, Terry was like my radio dad. I mean, you know, he taught me so much about being on the radio and not being on the radio. He was the absolute governor, and if we all had 1% of what he had on the radio, we'd be 100% better.
Well, another broadcaster, Henry Kelly, knew Sir Terry for 60 years. They went to the same school together in Dublin before both enjoying radio and TV careers in Britain. Today he shared some of his own special memories.
We're trying to cram as many of these old favourites in before we go.
A fellow broadcaster saw him in the foyer of the Broadcasting House, BBC, one morning at 7:28. And he said, "Terry, what are you doing down here? You're on in 2 minutes." And he said, "I know, I'm a bit early this morning."
It's 2 minutes to 8 o'clock.
I knew Terry for 60 years. I first met him when himself and his younger brother Brian came to my school in Dublin.
Isn't that good? Listen, lads, don't panic, don't panic. Look, I'll tell you what we'll do. No, will you talk amongst yourselves, listeners, for just a moment?
And people have said, oh, Terry Wogan, oh, consummate professional broadcaster. He wasn't a professional broadcaster at all. He never wrote a script in his life. Turned up, opened it up and said, here we are. Monday, where has the week gone? You know? And suddenly you were with them.
Here we go, the final total of this very night for children in need.
That's how we knew that there might have been something more wrong than a bad back. He did say in November, he said, you know, an old fella 77 standing on his feet for 10 hours asking people for money, it's ridiculous. He also had said once that children in need was the one thing he would never give up.
Now, I'm not going to pretend that this is not a sad day. You can probably hear it in my voice.
There is something in some Irish broadcasters. I think in the end of the day, we think it doesn't really matter. Nobody dies. But alas, Terry Wogan has died.
Henry Kelly there, remembering his friend Sir Terry Wogan, who passed away on Sunday, and how difficult it is to believe that we will not hear that voice again.
And he did so much for charity as well, behind the scenes.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
That's it. Julie Etchingham will be here at 10.
From all the team here, have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.